You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
And Michael House. Our next guest is entering his second season as a head coach of the Maryland baseball team. We are so happy to have on Coach Matt Swope ahead of the season beginning next Friday. Coach, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you talked about it a little bit at Media Day, but as a lifelong fan, kind of what was it like watching the Commanders this past season? You had noted how you kind of saw some similarities between you and DQ and kind of the culture of both those programs.
Yeah, surprising. I think anybody that watched Jane Daniels knew he was special, but to have that turnaround from last season with 4 wins to this year, I think I commented that in the Detroit game, I just was pure joy. I mean, it was just so shocking and so surprising across the board. It was just pure joy. And something for me, we won 3 Super Bowls when I grew up. It was a big part of my childhood, kind of growing up. My dad was a DC cop and took me down there a lot. So it was really special for me. And just more importantly, just for the community, going to the gas station, going to the grocery store, seeing people actually, bring back some pride into that organization. And even Katie was a cheerleader for the then Redskins for 10 years. So we have a lot of tradition in the house. So it was just pure joy. So it was exciting.
You kind of took the mantra of anybody, anywhere, anytime from the Commanders for your team this upcoming season. You also formed a leadership council this year, something that you guys had not had in previous seasons. Kind of, what was the point of creating that 4-player group for your team, and what do you hope that it helps kind of build culture-wise this season?
Yeah, the anybody, anywhere, anytime. I just kind of stole that from DQ. I think we mirror each other a little bit, just more of a player's coach, but building positive relationships. The relationships have always been the most important part to me, and having the players lead the team, right? You're only going to be as good as your leader. So I think after last season, or over the course of the years, we've always appointed one captain. And I just felt like last season that we, putting all the onus on one person after we lose 7 guys to the draft with over 20 new players is a lot of responsibility. And that's not a knock on that one captain. It's just a lot of responsibility without necessarily teaching or giving the tools to that person to kind of help lead. So what we did was just form this leadership council of 4 guys, and we met every single 2 weeks. And, we went over a John Gordon book. We talked about their leadership skills. We challenged them. And we just put a little bit more onus on building from within, and it be a little bit more player led. And I think the communication's been better. The energy's been better throughout the team. And I think they've done a really good job so far.
I'm going to take it back a year and a half ago when you were hired. Kind of a funny story, or when you were hired, your air conditioning apparently went out, and you had to, when David gave you a call, you kind of had to pass along your baby to a neighbor. Can you kind of detail that story of when you got hired and recount it for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot going on. Rob was down interviewing at a few places, and he did previously. So you're always kind of mentally prepared. You have everything ready to go, and everybody knows how I feel about this place, and if I had the opportunity, what I would want to do. But yeah, that morning it was kind of like, hey, can you be here in less than an hour? And that was the day that I was staying home watching Baylor and kind of taking care of her, and the air conditioner had been broken for a few days, and I literally threw on a suit and went like this to the next door neighbor with the baby, and I said thank you, and was on my way. And it was a pretty quick meeting with the executive staff, and just kind of reiterating being on the same page about wanting the job, and seeing where the direction was going to go, and give credit to them. They didn't really open it up, and the rest is history.
Did you kind of have an idea? I mean, were you the only interview that they ended up doing? Do you know that?
Yeah, I don't know. I assume so, just based off the timeline and not really opening it up. But again, you just never really know how it's going to go. But I was always mentally prepared for this, and I think anybody that knows me or definitely over there in the athletic department knows how I feel about this place. It's more of a lifestyle than a job. My best friends are Steve Suter, who does the radio for football. When he was here, Todd White. All these different things. At the golf tournament, we have, Walt Williams and Joe Smith and Johnny Rhodes and guys like that. So this has always been more of a lifestyle for me and a network that's been really important. Yeah, that's really important for me.
I mean, since you kind of have had a unique journey, you see a lot of coaches bounce around. I mean, your entire playing, I mean, not entire playing, but playing career led to then a coaching career that's basically only been at Maryland. How have you seen not only the baseball program, but the athletic department grow? I mean, I think you have kind of a unique perspective being here for, more than a decade at this point on how Maryland athletics has changed. What have you seen as kind of the biggest shift per se?
I think college athletics is tough, man. Even for me personally, within my purview of the baseball program, it feels like there's been 10 years of changes just the past couple of years, whether it's rules, transfer portal, NIL. NIL's now stopping a little bit more clamped, and rev share. So, internally, we've had a lot of change in college baseball, but for them over the course of time, all the way back to Debbie Yao when I was here and all those different things is you got to love Maryland. You got to love the work here. You got to get people that are in it for the right reasons. And I think you've seen perennially with the athletic programs is you have some Hall of Fame type coaches, right? I mean, you got Missy, you got John Tillman, you got Kathy Reese. You have these people that have been here, and Sash, people that have been there, spent a lot of their lives here. And I think that's what makes this place so great is the people and the tradition that's being built. And in the athletic department, it's always in a tough position, right? I mean, there's no secret that we're in a very transient area. And if you're not super relevant, it's not going to be the easiest here just with, like you said, you got the Commanders, the Caps, the Wizards. I mean, you got monuments, you got museums. I mean, there's a lot of things that draw your attention, and it's much tougher here in the DMV than it is maybe in Lincoln, right? Where that's going to be the talk of the town no matter what. So it is challenging, but we're doing anything we can as coaches to try to build that profile and help raise money, and I think they are. And I think with the rev share, it's going to bring some balance back to football and basketball for sure. And we'll kind of see how it trickles down to the Olympic sports as we go.
You had spent some time on the Terps coaching staff before becoming the head coach, learning behind John Sheff and Rob Vaughn, two coaches that have been pivotal for the Terps baseball program rising over the past decade. When you look at your experiences behind those two, is there anything you kind of learned from them that have helped you kind of craft your own head coaching experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes all the way back to your youth, right? The coaches I had growing up in Little League or Pop Warner football or basketball. I mean, Morgan Wooten was at DeMatha, when I was there playing basketball. One of the greatest basketball minds ever, invented the McDonald's All-American game and things like that. So I was shaped by a lot of different types of people and coaches throughout. And then obviously, when you get into this high level of coaching, you're trying to take the best from kind of what you learn from those guys. But then again, you got to be authentic and make it your own. So definitely take stuff from Eric Bakich, from John Sheff, from Rob Vaughn, tidbits here and there. But you got to be authentic and make it your own. Just because the kids will see right through you, they can spot a fake a mile away. So we try to focus right now for me more on just building that relationships and just always telling the truth. It's so hard with the stimulus with social media and the transfer portal and agents and parents and friends and all that. I mean, you can get pulled in so many different directions. So we always try to communicate the best we can and build these strong relationships and try to tell the truth.
You talk a lot about having a growth mindset and building your culture at Maryland baseball, finding players. And I think that's kind of exemplary of you as a coach with learning about motor preferences and applying it to your coaching. You even have a book now about that. For you, did that kind of growth mindset start for you as a player or more so as you got into your coaching journey and learned more?
Always as a player. I was always trying to find every tiny piece of what I could, right? With, whether it was hitting stuff or feeling it out in the cage or spending time here and there or learning back when the internet kind of started when I was playing. So, no, I think, I've always tried to have that growth mindset and find that niche as a player and a coach. And I think now you're just exposed to so many different things. And whether it's trying to learn the personality type of a player, we talk a lot, me and you, over the course of the years, is we're coaching every single player differently. Every single player is differently, the way they learn, the way they communicate, all these different things. So we're trying to accentuate that, who they are on and off the field, and then trying to bring that together into one collective goal when we're out there with the brand of baseball.
Speaking of you as a player, after you were cut from the Expos, I believe in 2004 or 05, which one was it? Sorry.
I think it was 03 actually.
03, okay.
Yeah.
You kind of went a decade there of doing different things. What were some of the jobs you picked up, and how was that kind of 10-year break almost from baseball? How did that affect you?
Yeah, I think my mind was always in the game, but when you come back to the DMV and you got to try to live, this isn't a place to just kind of live cheaply. So I was kind of thrust into, first I got into construction, was building homes, really high-end custom homes for a company out in Rockville. And then I switched to Department of Defense contractor in Roslyn. And I just, over the course of the years, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get back in the game. So I was willing to do whatever it was. And sometimes you got to be away a little bit to kind of bring you in your journey. But I give myself a little bit of credit. Not many people would take that risk to come back. I think that first year in 2012, I made $15,000. So I think I made 15 or 20 grand total. To be able to come back at 32 years old isn't really easy. So, but when they say you're happy, you never work a day in your life. And so it ended up being the best decision I could ever make. And just nothing but pure joy. And obviously that pretty quickly in 14, winning a regional, and 15, as soon as we kind of got going, had a lot of success early with now a lot of major leaguers. So it's a great decision. At the time, I probably got some flack from parents and friends about that, but ended up working out great.
I mean, your parents are kind of Maryland lifers too. When you called them to tell them, like, I got the head coaching job, can you kind of detail what that was like, how emotional that was for the three of you? Yeah,
I mean, I just went to my dad's Sigma Chi party 2 weeks ago at his house. So he's a significant Sig, which is kind of, I think, their Sigma Chi Hall of Fame. And, just seeing all his, fraternity brothers, and I was going there 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old every year for homecoming over at the frat house. That's now changed, but so that's kind of where I started in my journey. So sure, my dad's a little bit more quiet, a little bit more rigid, but he was really proud. He doesn't say a lot, but I know he was really proud. Of me, and my mom was definitely probably more emotional. Someone that's been more by my side in my baseball journey. And she drove to every single series. She drove to Georgia Tech. She drove to Florida State. She didn't fly. She always drove. So they both had their part in my journey, and I'm just really appreciative of their support over the years.
Taking it to the current team this year, obviously you guys are coming off a disappointing season, but made some key additions, bringing back some veterans. Can you tell me, like, kind of the number one reason that you're really excited about this team?
Yeah, first, I don't know if I would list it as disappointing. I think 34-22 is 6th most wins in school history. Going into the last series, we were 34-19 with a top 30 RPI. So if you had told me we were in that position going to last weekend, I would have taken that. Won the first 5 weekends too. So when you lose 7 players of the draft, you have the most freshman starts in the Big Ten, and then not an older group. I thought at a lot of the season the guys probably overachieved. Maybe wouldn't have said that last year, but I thought for where we were at after those 2 juggernaut of teams from the previous years, I think I would take away a lot of positives and view it more as a success. Yes, we could have fared better by the standings in the Big Ten, and I think we were all disappointed in that. But overall, was happy with year one, and then going into this year, just getting deeper, getting tougher. That was our 2 biggest focuses. Was being a little bit tougher on the field and just adding that depth. Again, just being in a position where we knew we were going to take our lumps and play a lot of different freshmen. So you have most of those guys back. Did a good job in the portal, adding the depth from the position player side with Hollis Porter, Liam Wilson, and Aiden Hill, guys that very self-intrinsically motivated, very tough, very physical. And then on the other end, you get someone like Kyle McCoy back. It's almost like getting a frontline guy in the portal. So you mix that with a lot of the guys we have back on both sides of the ball. Joey McManus, that's been electric in the preseason. Evan Smith, who really finished out the year strong. You got Coaster, Melendez, Ryan Van Buren has added a cutter. AJ Johnson was 92, 94 the other day in the cold. I mean, you're talking about a lot of guys back and a lot of depth and experience from teams that won a lot of games. So super excited about just the depth we have and just the overall toughness for the season.
This year you named Eddie Hakopian the team captain. He's going to be wearing that number 3, which is for the team captain. With Eddie, a guy who you thought might have gotten drafted this past summer, didn't. He sticks in College Park, has had an interesting collegiate experience starting at JUCO, then coming to Maryland and immediately getting into a starting role here. Kind of what's the leader that Maryland is getting this year in him, and also the player that they're getting, someone who we thought could have been drafted and is now back for his senior year?
Yeah, huge bonus for us. And the team named him the captain, not me. So give them credit for that. Like, he earned it. We talk about, like I said, being player-led. But, I mean, in my opinion, has no business being back in college this year. One of the best hitters in the Big Ten. He wakes up and hits. And what a great journey from being undersized, not recruited by anybody at a high school, going to California, betting on himself, coming back on a loaded team, finding his way to play first base on the 2 greatest teams, talent-wise, maybe we've ever had, and just has made his mark to now where he's become that emotional leader. He's become that communicative leader, which has been really important for his journey and great for ours. So just couldn't be more happy for him. Obviously, it means a lot to me, him being from Maryland, and his brother Chris here, and dad Derek, who I've known for a long time. So I think it builds on what we want to be by keeping the best players home first, and then kind of branching out from there. But he's going to be in the staple in the lineup, of course, and we're going to kind of go as him and Chris go in the lineup.
And with Chris, obviously, he had that electric freshman year, had 15 home runs, second most on the team. What type of jump are you expecting him to have this sophomore year? What have you seen from him in the offseason, in the fall, now in the winter, and also just moving to shortstop? What do you think his presence there at that position is going to do for the team defensively?
Yeah, I think you're just looking at that natural progression. Had a great summer, right? We put him in Martha's Vineyard so he can play short on dirt all summer. So got a lot of experience at that, and he's going to move over to shortstop for us. Chris is just a really steady guy. Him and Eddie are very different from personality type-wise. They're both baseball rats, though. That's the key. So Chris really cares. Also been really good for the guys as an emotional leader. And he's very consistent. Guys know what they're going to get out of him. He's very, very tough as well. So, we're going to kind of go, like I said, as both of those guys go. I'm hoping for a big year for Chris. I think he's set up for that. He's really worked hard on his body. He's gotten more detailed and gotten more mature over the last year or so. With just like maybe some off the field stuff, right? Some of the weightlifting stuff. He was one of those guys you almost had to pull the reins on because he was doing too much, too many swings, working too hard, doing too much in the weight room, doing all that. So he's a guy that we're trying to get a little bit more focused on the performance aspect of it than just maybe overdoing it a little bit from working hard. But can't say enough about both of those guys and excited to see what kind of years they can put up.
Coach, where did the moniker Dirty Terps come from? Do you know the origin story of that?
Yeah, I created it. So I created it, I think in 2012 or something. I originally started using that. I actually got it from some of the football guys when I was playing here. So when I was playing here, some of the football guys were calling each other that. I don't even know why or where it came from. I think it may have actually came from someone like Denard Wilson, who's coaching in the NFL now. I'm not quite sure. But that's really where it started. And then when I came back to the coaching staff, I was like, I think I started the Twitter and Instagram for Maryland baseball. It wasn't really a thing back then. I created it all. And I was back then doing the majority of the posts and the tweets. So I think I just started hashtagging Dirty Terps. And I think it's a great mantra. It's a great, has a nice ring to it. And yeah, I've been using it ever since.
In terms of, now this is kind of I think a fun question and one that I want to hear your process on. You were ejected twice last year, I believe. We did lines before the season and we put you at 1.5, so you barely hit the over, but congrats there, I guess. When you do get ejected or decide to be ejected, is it generally like a decision like before you go out to meet the umpire to maybe not fire up the team, but to kind of make a point? or is it just something that happens, or is it kind of a mix of both? Because I think baseball is kind of one of the unique sports in that regard, where there's that intimate relationship between an umpire and a manager. Can you kind of talk about the process for an ejection and what goes into it from a coach's perspective?
That's an interesting question. I don't think anybody goes into anything wanting to get ejected, because I think once you start to get on the umpires, it doesn't really matter what you're trying to do for the team. Normally, it doesn't really end up in a good thing, you know? So, I mean, I would say with your question, though, is that we talked a lot of our team about not having body language. So we don't want our team to talk back to the umpires. We don't want them to really acknowledge good or bad on the field with a ton of emotion based off things you can't really control. So in that instance, if, you know, an umpire does have a bad zone consistently or something's happening, there are definitely times where you have to have your players back. And, you know, like I said, being a player's coach, I always try to pride on not having body language and really complaining to the umpire. So there's times where I think it was a check swing at Portland that happened that ended up, you know, not being a swing. And then the zone, I think at the Penn State game was two instances where it happened more of me trying to have the players back. So it's never really that calculated on trying to get thrown out to. If I have to fire up the team by doing that, then we're in big trouble. So I don't think that's ever it, but there's definitely probably a little bit to having your players back and knowing that you're going to fight for them sometimes if they can't really speak for themselves.
Gotcha. Last question from us. You know, the Orioles have made, and we know you're a big Orioles fan, obviously, they've made some adjustments to their stadiums. You know, Camden's kind of gone back and then in and then back again, and we don't really know what's happening. For one, do you like the changes that they've made to the O Stadium? And if you could choose to do anything to the Bob, just like Dream World, is there anything that you would kind of alter or change?
Yeah, I did not like what they did at the park at Camden Yards at first. I mean, I understand trying to build, you know, around the minor league system or hitters or whatever. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me in that left field. So I'm glad they're kind of bringing it in. I think it actually will not want hitters to come here. And I know they're pretty stacked in their minor league system, and the guys they have in the big leagues are really young and under control for a while. But yeah, wasn't the biggest fan of that. I'm also a traditional guy. I've been going to Camden Yards since it's open. So I think it's one of the best stadiums still in the major leagues, and it was fit pretty perfectly. So it's good to see them go a little bit back towards that. And I know the right-handed hitters there will approve of that as well. When it comes to the Bob, I think something that would be cool, obviously, if I couldn't change anything, would be to add some type of catwalk in the outfield. So I think if you can have this kind of catwalk all the way behind the wall, where people can kind of make it one big circle and kind of travel around, I think you could build a little bit of tradition with some of the students and where they would want to go hang out and maybe heckle some other guys. So obviously there's a lot that I'm working towards to try to build a new stadium. That's going to take some money. If you guys want to pitch in at all, or find somebody that can give me some money. But other than that, I think that would just be cool. Kind of, you guys will see too with the indoor, how you kind of come down now. You know, there's some space behind that little area right there. I think it would be kind of cool if that kind of went all the way around, and fans could kind of get that 360 view.
The indoor looks great, by the way, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
And thanks again for coming on. We appreciate your time. Good luck this season. Hope everything goes well for you and the hashtag Dirty Terps.
Thank you. I appreciate it. See you guys out there.
Thank you, Coach. And that was a great talk with head coach Matt Swope. Talked a little bit about his past and a little bit about the upcoming team for this season. And that's what we're going to do this episode. We're going to do a little bit of a preview for the baseball team. Opening day is next Friday against UAB. And this is a big season for the Terps. This is year 2 for Matt Swope now. Has a year under his belt. Some key returners, some not many 2 key losses. So I guess I'm just going to get into what to look for. And I think the biggest thing is another revamped pitching staff for the Terps. This is what we talked about at the beginning of last season, but this year they do have a lot more depth than they've had in previous years. I'm going to start with the starting rotation and what that could look like. And you're going to see Kyle McCoy coming back. If you remember last season, he sat out with Tommy John surgery. He's coming back this year as a redshirt sophomore. When he did start his freshman year in 2023, he had a 4-6 record, 5.91 ERA, and was an all Big Ten freshman team. honoree. Then you're also probably going to get Joey McManus on Saturdays, 10 starts last year, 1-2 record, 4.99 ERA. And then on Sunday, that's a little bit of an open slate for the Terps. You could have Omar Melendez, who made 6 starts last year, had a 5-2 record, 4.64 ERA. You could also see Evan Smith joining the fold in that weekend rotation. He had 3 starts last year as a freshman, 15 appearances, 1-2 record, 5.24 ERA. But what the Terps are expecting this year for those ERA numbers to bump up. They want to see a lot of improvement from those starters. Kyle McCoy, he seems pretty confident that he's going to make that jump following a year off, following that Tommy John surgery. Joey McManus, the word so far from the winter, from the early spring, is that he's just been electric, ready for that sophomore year.
I think that this team, Mike, you talked a little bit about the pitching staff. I think that one of the biggest things you have to focus on is the addition of McCoy. Swope in our interview said that it's like getting a frontline starter from the portal, which Maryland baseball probably wouldn't be able to get normally. He looks visibly more, athletic. He's put on weight, clearly. I think he looks like he's primed for a big season. I do have a little bit of questions about the pitching depth behind him. A lot of it is unproven sophomores. So I do think that maybe that's being overblown a little bit. And the offense, I think, has a chance to rebound. I think it's going to be in a different way, maybe, Mike, than what we've seen in years past. I don't expect this team to be super power heavy. I mean, Chris Hakopian and Hollis Porter both have got some decent slugging, but nobody hit more. Only one player who's returning hit more than 10 home runs last year, and that was Hakopian. And I don't think that they really have these guys that are, Jordan Crossland maybe, but Braden Martin isn't exactly a power hitter. I don't think Eddie Hakopian's all of a sudden in his last season going to spring out for 15 homers. These are guys that I wouldn't really expect to be, crushing the ball, but I think they're going to get it done with a lot of doubles, a lot of, on-base guys. And I think that that's a recipe that can win. My question to you is, there were a couple guys who had disappointing seasons who I think Maryland expected to step in and be really good last year. Elijah Lambros had kind of a tough year. I mean, he rebounded and hit 267, but struggled, decently at the beginning, really, especially. Jacob Orr, Alex Calarco, Devin Russell. I mean, these were guys you were talking up in the preseason as being legitimate threats in the lineup. Who out of those kind of group of guys that disappointed do you think you could see rebounding?
I first want to start with what you said about McCoy. I have a big piece coming out next week for the Diamondback about his rehab from that Tommy John surgery, so stay on the lookout for that. But going back to the offense here, a name you didn't mention, Aiden Hill, a transfer from VCU. Last year, he started every single game, batted .267, had 44 RBI, 6 home runs, a .423 on-base percentage. That's a guy that the Terps are expecting to step up and can bring some slugging to the lineup. They also think Devin Russell, that's a guy, he slugged .451 last year. He wasn't too bad. 9 home runs his first year as a starter. And then also you mentioned Calarco. I think Calarco is going to have a rebound year. That was his first year in the Matt Swope system, implementing the motor preferences, finding what works for him. And he had 4 home runs, started here and there at catcher. I think you're going to see a revolving door at catcher this year between Calarco and Devin Russell. They can always go to either option. And then in terms of slugging, you mentioned it too, Hollis Porter. Last year he hit a program record 20 home runs at Pearl River Community College. That is a big bat that's being added to your lineup. And that was really not talked about enough, but a big pull for Maryland over the offseason to be able to get a top JUCO target that I can guarantee you SEC teams were looking at Porter. There's a lot of competition for Porter, and the fact that he went to Maryland, I think could help them in the future with getting those big targets in the transfer portal.
I want to move over and talk schedule very briefly. Looking back to last year, had that not super strong, but stronger non-conference record, and then going 10-14 against the Big Ten. Do you think that's something similar that will happen this year? What are your kind of predictions in terms of non-conference record to conference record?
Right, you mentioned it. The non-conference record last year was outstanding, 24-8 against non-con opponents. And then once they got into conference play, 10-14 against the Big Ten. You look at the series that they lost. Every series other than the Northwestern series, and Northwestern series was very bad. That was an 18-34 team. Only had 4 wins in the Big Ten, a majority of them coming to Maryland. That can't happen again. But Michigan, Indiana, Nebraska, Penn State, those are all teams that made the Big Ten tournament last year. Of course, Maryland expects to be in that level and that tier that's reaching the Big Ten tournament. So when you look ahead to the season upcoming, Again, the non-con is a little bit weak. I will say that they have 2 meetings against Wake Forest early on in February, March, at that last part of February, early part of March. Last year, Wake Forest finished 14th in RPI. That's a big-time opponent early on in the schedule that Swope added, I assume, to get his squad battle tested for the season. They also have a midweek meeting against Virginia in the ACC. That's on March 11th. Virginia finished 9th in RPI last year. So those are going to be big litmus tests early on in the year to kind of see where does this squad kind of line? Where do they fall in terms of upper tier opponents? Because they had some big wins last year. They beat James Madison both times they played them. That was one of their best non-con opponents. And then when you get into the conference slate, you got Illinois, Oregon, Indiana, that stretch in the early part of April. That's going to be a big proving point for the Terps as well, because Northwestern, Washington, UCLA, those are going to be your first conference opponents. Those aren't too great. They weren't great RPI-wise last year. So really looking at that stretch in the schedule between the non-con where you got Wake Forest and Virginia, and then conference-wise between Indiana, Oregon, and Nebraska, that's really going to say a lot about where this Terps team is this season. I also want to throw Illinois into the mix as well. The Terps beat Illinois last year. They had the best regular season in the Big Ten conference standings-wise, and they have another meeting with Illinois this season.
Mike, I want to give you some over-unders. We did this last year. You went, I think, 3 of 4, so pretty solid. But this year, we're going to put you to the test. I got 5 over-unders this year that I want to ask you about. First off, starting with the guy that you have a big piece coming on, Kyle McCoy. Over under 3.00 ERA this year for Mr. McCoy, Maryland's ace.
I'm going to go under. I think he's going to be the ace that Maryland was looking for last year. They did not have one at all. They started Kenny Littman on Fridays. That switched mid-season. Never really had that true Friday night starter, and I think the Terps got one this year.
Next up, we'll go back to the lineup and say over or under 3.5 hitters with an average of over 300. The year before last year, it was 4 or 5 guys. Last year, only 2, the Hakopian brothers. Do they get over 3.5 this season?
I definitely think they get over 3.5, whether that's Braden Martin coming back for his sophomore year, Elijah Lambros bouncing back from last season, Copians, obviously you got to throw them in there, and then Hollis Porter. Again, that was such a massive addition for this team to get Hollis Porter, plug him into that lineup with that slugging power. Really excited to watch the Terps offense this year.
We'll keep it going with the offense and go to a home run stat. So last year they actually finished 3rd in the Big Ten in home runs, but that was including the non-conference. Interestingly, when you flipped it over to just conference play, that number dropped down all the way to 5th. So only they hit 32 in conference. Do you think they get over 80 this year? They hit 77 last season.
Yes, they got an improved lineup. The biggest loss was Sam Honar. He led the team in home runs, but you replaced him with a guy who can hit home runs in Hollis Porter. And then Devin Russell. I expect Devin Russell to have a bigger year than last year. I expect Alex Clarko to have a bigger year, Aiden Hill to have a big year.
So Mike's very high on the Terps, as you can tell, but we're going to go to team ERA now, back to the staff. Team ERA of over under 5.5. Last year, in Big Ten play, they were 10th in conference with an ERA at 6.99. Do you think they get over or under 5.5?
I'm going to go under. I know you doubt the pitching staff, but I look at names like Braden Ryan, who's transferring in from Merrimack last year. He had 14 starts with a 4.58 ERA, led that team in strikeouts, would have led the Terps in strikeouts last year as well. Logan Coaster, I think he's moving to the bullpen after starting every single weekend last year. Jake Yeager, freshman, number 1 ranked player in the state of Maryland last year. Got another highly ranked prospect in Christopher Cespedes, who is a number 1 right-hander in New York. I think this pitching staff has a lot of depth that people are underrating.
So Mike's gone all positive side. I'm going to give him one last question. Over or under 2.5 in the Big Ten at the Terps finish?
2.5. I'm going to go under. I think they have a good chance of finishing second. I think they have a really good chance of finishing first. You look at the depth on the offense, you look at the depth on the pitching staff. I think this Terps team is scary, and a lot of people are underlooking them.
Fascinating stuff there from Mike.
We got to do an ejections line.
Well, we have to, I think.
We asked Swope about it, and he kind of was saying it's not purposeful, but we'll go back to it. Set it at 1.5 again. What would you put it at?
I'm slamming the over on that. I'm slamming the over.
I think in year 2 he gets a little more comfortable. Well, yeah, those were really interesting, and obviously fascinating stuff here for the baseball team. So you can catch them in the next week for the Dirty Terps back out on the field. Let's take it over to a team that's currently playing, and guys, is right now the talk of College Park, and maybe the talk of college basketball. That feels like a little bit of a hyperbole, but Maryland basketball is back finally in the AP Top 25 poll. First time in nearly 2 years the Terps have been ranked. They checked in at number 18 in the AP poll and 24th in the coaches poll, so a bit of a discrepancy there. But clearly, Maryland fans excited to be back. Brendan, when you saw the ranking, what was your initial reaction?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I honestly think that the AP poll had it right. Maryland really didn't deserve to be ranked until the last week in the win over Wisconsin. I know they were something like 27th if you count receiving votes, but no one cares unless you're top 25. Maryland had those bad losses to Northwestern and Washington, and from what I saw, I didn't really think they deserved to be ranked in the top 25. The issue with rankings is there's teams that deserve to be ranked in the top 25 because of their resume, and there's the teams that are the top 25 teams, and they just have maybe some bad losses. And I think Maryland was probably in that category of a team that a lot of voters thought was actually a top 25 team, but they didn't necessarily deserve to be. I will say, going back 2 years to the last time Maryland was ranked, it was super early in the season. It was after only like 8 or so games, more of a fraudulent ranking, if you will. This one comes much later into the season, into the second half of Big Ten play. I think this ranking is much more deserving and makes a lot more sense. And, Maryland could definitely move up to somewhere in the top 10 range if they have a 2-0 week against Ohio State and Rutgers. But, winning on the road against Ohio State is going to be a really tough matchup for Maryland, especially because I think Ohio State is out for blood after the blowout that happened in College Park.
Just to clarify for Brennan, because totally right sentiment, but they were actually ranked in February of Willard's first year. The last time they were ranked this high.
What were they? They were ranked in February. I was unaware of that.
Yeah, they were February 21st, I believe. They were ranked at 21st in the country, or February 27th, they were ranked 21st. So it was right after that stretch where they kind of had before going into the Big Ten tournament.
Thank you for that correction. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but the last time they were ranked this high exactly was an 8-0 record in Willard's first year. And I agree. I feel like this is Willard's best team. I think we can agree, guys. I mean, we talked about the Wisconsin game. KenPom has them ranked as underdogs heading into Ohio State, so that's kind of fascinating. 2-point underdogs in Columbus. I do agree with Brendan. I think that this is going to be a much tougher game than people anticipate. I think coming off the high of being ranked, everyone's going to probably expect, Ohio State, kind of a weird team, up and down. We smoked them last time, blah, 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 blah. I would not be surprised if the Buckeyes, this was a one-possession game pretty much the entire way. I would actually probably predict a loss for Maryland if I had to, but I think it's going to be a really close game and entertaining for sure. So fourth in the Big Ten with 6 teams being ranked is a really good start. And I think that if they can get that double bye and slot in at the 4th spot, you're positioning yourself really well for what should be, guys, I mean, I can't already wait for the Big Ten tournament. It is going to be so entertaining. So many good teams this year, so many fun teams. And I think Maryland's one of them.
I'm really watching the matchup between Juju and Derek Queen versus Aaron Bradshaw, which is Ohio State's big man. He only averages 17 minutes a game. I have a hard time believing he's going to play that little when Maryland has 2 bigs that play as often as they do. I think the key for Maryland to be able to succeed against Bradshaw, who's taller than anybody on their roster, is you just got to get him into foul trouble. If you look at his game log, he's had a couple games where he gets into foul trouble, limits a lot of his minutes. If Queen can get him into foul trouble, Juju Reese can get him into foul trouble. If those two can stay out of foul trouble themselves, I think they can dominate the paint and win that game. It's hard to guard one big guy. It's going to be even harder to guard 2 of them.
Definitely. We'll be all tuning into that one on Thursday, and it should be really fascinating stuff. Let's flip it over to a team kind of on the downward trend, the opposite side, the women's basketball team. Really tough loss against Illinois. Brendan, the Shy Sellers and Bree McDaniel injuries, I mean, it coincides with their toughest stretch of the season, so I don't want to say that, that sparked it. It could just be that they're losing. But now this is, a decent stretch of some tough showings. Even the Penn State game, they didn't look right per se. Give me a concern level 1 through 10 of where you're at with Brenda Freese's team right now.
Concern level with the team, I would say, is probably a 5 out of 10. They still have the pieces to be a very, very good basketball team. Losing Bree hurts, but it doesn't completely destroy their season. But I would say overall with their trajectory, I'm less concerned. They lose to Illinois, but as I said last week, they have a much easier path in the final, I believe 6 or 7 games remaining in the Big Ten. They do have to go out west, which you have to be a little bit concerned of. They face Oregon on Thursday and Washington on Sunday. That West Coast trip has messed up teams across all sports. So it will be interesting, and those are 2 games they absolutely have to win. But with all of that being said, they do have an easier path compared to the other top teams in the Big Ten. And I have something to say about the rankings in terms of the standings for the women in the Big Ten. Right now, Maryland is sitting in 6th. And frankly, I don't think that would be the worst case scenario, because if you look at the standings right now, if Maryland finishes 4th, although they do get the double bye, they'll have to play UCLA in the semifinals, which would be a very tough matchup and means Maryland will likely not make the final. So I think the easier road for Maryland to have success in the Big Ten tournament would be to probably finish in that 6th slot. But, you really don't want to be gaming for that. So obviously they're going to be trying to win out all their games, but that would be the silver lining I would see from there.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the ceiling at this point is the 4 spot. So I don't know. I really like this team. I still it's hard for me to give up on them, but Bree being out and Shy, it doesn't necessarily look right per se. I mean, I think that'll change over time. She gets more healthy, but I'm just I can't give up on them per se, because I think they have a lot of talent, but I don't know how I feel, especially just kind of with the struggles. I mean, it's going to be fascinating. I think depending on where Sellers is, that'll kind of determine the ceiling of this team. So moving from women's hoops on to men's lax, really, really good stuff to start the year. Up 7-0 at half against Richmond, who's historically a pretty strong program. No, Brendan? And to kind of have that success early in the year, especially with some of the pieces they lost last season we talked about. What did you take away from men's lacrosse's first game, B?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, the final score was 12-7, but really at the end of the day, that doesn't tell the story. The fourth quarter didn't matter very much, gave up some garbage time goals. Maryland dominated that game. I don't think Richmond is probably quite as good as the polls had them, but still, Maryland comes out, has a very strong performance. I mean, up 7-0 at halftime. That game was pretty much over. They looked pretty solid. Matthew Keegan, who's a transfer from Binghamton, had 3 goals. Daniel Kelly had 3 goals. The biggest question mark was where the offensive production is going to come from, and I think Daniel Kelly is probably going to have a big part in that. Now Maryland extends their season opener streak to 32, which almost got snapped last year. Brian Rumpel played, which is kind of funny just because his freshman year, when McNaney got injured, he came in, he played almost every game for the remainder of that season, and they didn't play at all last year, but got a couple minutes at the end. So finally saw some time after playing a ton of freshman year, but McNaney is going to be the guy wearing number 1 in net. Maryland faces Loyola Maryland on Saturday. They won 11-4 last year. Last time that Maryland played at Loyola is when McNaney got injured. Loyola's just not really going to be that much of a test for Maryland, I don't think. They lost to Georgetown 6-13. Loyola wasn't ranked to start the season. They certainly are not going to be after that game. So 2 games at the beginning of the season that usually give Maryland enough of a test to kind of start their season. A little bit weaker this year, but I would expect them to take care of business. And, there's a chance they'll be looking ahead a little bit to that Syracuse game, which is going to be a ranked matchup in College Park 2 weeks from now. That's really the game to look forward to for the lacrosse team, just because I don't think that Loyola is going to be that much of a test, but you never know. But I would expect Maryland to come out on top in that one.
Yeah, Terps are going to be good all season. We'll be discussing them all season, and they're back out there. So really fun stuff. I think this stretch is probably the best stretch for Maryland athletic fans, guys. No, I mean,
it's awesome.
Basketball, both lacrosses, baseball starting to get into swing. Really, really, really good stuff in College Park right now. I didn't mention softball just because historically they haven't necessarily been that part of positive, but maybe in Lauren Carn's second season, they'll get it figured out. They start their season upcoming here at the Arizona State Classic. They're going to play California twice, Arizona State, Miami, Ohio, and then Utah in that order. So first game is on February 6th at 8 p.m. And to kind of talk over really briefly about what the Terps are looking at this year, they bring back some big pieces. The biggest piece of them all, Courtney Weish, left, so they'll have to find a way to replace that. Julia Scher had a good season last year as kind of the secondary pitcher. They got some other people they picked up. Genevieve Ebaugh has a chance to contribute. I think that there are some interesting pieces there. Kira Busher has has always been kind of a promising player. But this is a team that's definitely still in the rebuilding phase, guys. I mean, you're looking at a unit that has really struggled offensively and pitching, and now they lost probably their two best players. Jada McFarland exited, and Courtney Weish. It's going to have to be a full-scale rebuild. Maisie McFarland is back, which will help, and you have some other pieces. Sydney Lewis, Madison Runyon are here. Picked up some transfers, so they got a couple of pieces. But guys, I would really be surprised if this team is anywhere but at the bottom of the Big Ten. I would not be surprised by a last place finish. So not necessarily looking good for the Terps this year.
It's just tough for Lauren Karn, went to the NCAA tournament in a previous stint in Oakland from 2022 and 2023. And then you just come to a much more difficult place in the Big Ten, and just trying to win and string games together is much harder. Sam said, the conference play is going to be the toughest. They finished slightly above 500 there, but if they can put together, they finished 8-15 in conference last year. If they can get back to that mark, there would probably be, that'd be something I would expect. I wouldn't expect them to exceed that by a big margin, but obviously you'll be following, and maybe our takes will change on that. Moving from softball to wrestling, heading back into some of those winter sports. The Pavilion was sold out against Iowa on Sunday, and Iowa took care of business. Number 2 team in the country. Maryland looked strong to start, but not too much to say at the end. Obviously, we talked to Clemson last week. He knew it was going to be a tough matchup. But here's the deal with wrestling right now. That's at 3-2 in conference, and they have Rutgers, Purdue, and Penn State remaining. Penn State is going to be a very, very, very tough match to win. But Rutgers and Purdue are matches they could win. And if that happened, it would be the first time they finished with a winning conference record since 2012 and 2023 season. That was obviously in the ACC. Maryland has never even had more than 2 wins in the Big Ten since joining. They've never had a winning season in the Big Ten. And before this season, altogether, Maryland had 4 total wins in Big Ten duels. So they could, with one more, they could tie their previous, 10 years just for this one season. And if they could put together a win against Rutgers and Purdue, which I think is possible, then this would, by all accounts, be an extremely, extremely successful season for wrestling. Something to keep an eye on, and definitely something very interesting going forward, because, although Maryland wrestling is not always going to be the top of the Big Ten, the standard for them is getting moved up, as Alex Clemson said last week. And so we'll have to keep an eye on the 3 remaining matches they have.
Starting a little brief segment I think you guys might like here. I'm going to start picking out game of the week. So from the spans of when we record to then our next recording. So generally that'll be, a Monday to Monday, a Tuesday to Tuesday, somewhere around that span. We're recording this on Monday, February 3rd. Going to pick a game, and I want us 3 to pick what we think the result of that game will be. It was a tough test this week. Kind of had a number of options, but I think the clear game that sticks out, lacrosse is playing Loyola. Women's basketball has the West Coast teams that aren't very good. I think it is that Maryland-Ohio State game. Rutgers plays on Sunday, but I would pick the Terps and the Buckeyes as my game of the week. We'll rotate this every week. So Brendan will pick one, Mike will pick one the next week, per se. But this time, I want to hear, what are your guys' predictions for Terps Buckeyes? I already said I think Maryland loses in a narrow game. But Mike, what do you think is going to happen down there in Columbus?
I think Maryland's going to lose in a narrow game too. I think all you got to look at is Kevin Willard's record in road games. I mean, last year he was 4-8, hasn't gotten off to a good start. This year, 2-4, and his first year he was 2-9. Something he needs to clean up, but I don't think that's going to be happening against Ohio State.
I think Maryland wins by 8. I think it's a super close first half. Maryland probably goes down. Ohio State's coming at them. But I overall think Maryland is actually a better team than this Ohio State team. Ohio State had a much tougher test and more recent test. Maryland had the week off. They had time to rest. And, if they're not prepared for this game, then it's pretty much on the players and also on Willard. So I would actually expect Maryland to win this game. But it's going to be very, very tough.
Yeah, I think it'll be a fun game, and that's why it's this week's game of the week. So that'll wrap that up from us, and Brendan's going to take us out all the way with a terrific Terp he says is going to live up to even beyond our lofty standards.
This one's going triple platinum, Mike and Sam. Just listen up. I came across this last week when I was doing wrestling research, but I didn't want to, overburden with too much wrestling content, so I decided to throw it in for the next week. This week's terrific Terp is William Krause, better known as Sully. Krause helped start the sport of wrestling at the University of Maryland in 1940. He recorded a 17-2 record while wrestling at Maryland as a student. Krause also played on the football team. Oddly enough, Krause was supposed to attend Virginia Military Institute, but because of the connection to the Army, he needed to pass a vision test. He failed and was instead recruited to attend University of Maryland in College Park. At school, as a sophomore, playing football, Krause did not make the travel roster, but it didn't stop him from making the trip with the team during his sophomore year to head up to Syracuse. He went to upstate New York looking for a good time. He took the bus with the band and then partied with some friends, hung out with his friend who was in a fraternity, and found a date to the game. While he was at the game, he was asked by a UMD athletic official, or personnel rather, if he would be a spotter for the radio crew. He was likely trying to enjoy the game, and he declined the offer from the radio crew. He then found out he would get $10, some hot dogs, and Coca-Cola. So Krause was in and became the radio spotter. After eating hot dogs and sitting in the press box, a coach for the University of Maryland football team came up to grab him because 2 tackles had been injured in the game. Krause put on a uniform and played in the game for Maryland. I mean, yeah, this is 1940, but pretty wild for a guy who wasn't supposed to make the trip at all and seems like he had spent the weekend before partying at Syracuse. Regardless, for Krause, football was in his blood. His brother, Ray Krause, was an All-American tackle for Maryland and an All-Pro in the NFL. Sully was a professional football player too. He spent the 1942 season playing football for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He returned to Maryland after World War II, and he served as an assistant football coach and the head wrestling coach. When Maryland joined the ACC in 1954, they proceeded to win 16 consecutive conference titles, going undefeated at all those seasons. They got second in 1970 and then won the next 4 conference titles too. Krause was an odd guy. He nicknamed Lefty Driesell Dribble Puss and had his run-ins with Driesell over the sauna and court time at Cole Fieldhouse. Nonetheless, Krause was instrumental in establishing the wrestling community at Maryland and in the DMV. He also served as a tournament director for 3 NCAA championships held in College Park. Krause is in the Maryland Hall of Fame as a player and as a coach, and he is this week's Terrific Terp.
That is awesome. I feel really bad for his date. What the heck? just ghosted her to get on the field. But hey, you got to do what you got to do sometimes, right? That's pretty funny, though. Good stuff, Brendan.
Thank you. I had to pull out a good one.
Right, Mike, he's kind of following the romance train now. This is back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was hoping this had another love story, tangled in it. Not the same as last week.
There was a date, and then he, had to do what a team. He's a team player.
Team first guy. You got to respect it.
I would have loved to see what those run-ins in the sauna with Driesell were actually about. I'm curious about what you meant by that.
Apparently, it was very dangerous, and he didn't want to give him the keys. It was a whole controversial. It seemed like him and Lefty weren't, the best of friends, but they had to share Cole Fieldhouse back in the day.
That's awesome, though, and that's the only content that you're going to get. I can promise you at Under the Shell from our awesome producer and from our team. We appreciate you listening. Baseball season right around the corner, so really excited for that, and we'll be talking all about the Terps. It's our busiest time of the year, probably, so we're really pumped up to keep providing you guys with fun content. So keep listening, keep sharing, keep showing your friends. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all the feeds, all the places. And from us, TikTok too, if you have it still. And from us, have a good rest of your night.
Guess what? You got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.